I'm really pleased to welcome Judith and Nicholas Martin tonight. Judith is the author of Miss Manners columns and best-selling books. She's written 2 novels and also a travel book on Venice, and this is your 17th book. Did I read that somewhere? So. Amazing. And Nicholas, who wrote the Da Capo Opera Manual, worked at the White House and was publisher of the Washington Monthly before becoming director of operations at the Lyric Opera of Chicago. So in this book, in Miss Manners, Mind's Your Business, Judith and Nicholas tackle the question, what are professional manners, and how are they different from casual manners? The book offers guidelines for getting along with coworkers, whether it's saying the right thing to a colleague who's being let go, or knowing where the line is between flirtation and sexual harassment. They share with their readers the advice necessary to win the job, keep the job, and leave the job with sanity and dignity, something I think we can all agree is very important. Again, we're so glad to have you here and so pleased to welcome Judith and Nicholas Martin. Please join me in welcoming them.
Thank you very much. I think I might have misunderstood the concept of bring your children to work. I thought it was put your children to work. I mean, it's an old American tradition. I mean, why do you think you have the summer off from preschool? Don't just play in the dirt, till the soil. But now we have child labor laws. And so I didn't put my children to work until they had firmly established their own careers in different fields. My daughter teaches improv comedy at Second City. But 4 years ago, when she was getting married, she was naturally deep into bridal porn, which is those 10-pound magazines and the internet sites that teach you how to practice extortion on your guests so that you can have a day and maybe a week of self-glorification at their expense. And so she collaborated with me on Miss Manners' Guide to a Surprisingly Dignified Wedding. And when I came to write about business manners, well, here's my son who's been in a number of fields, although admittedly the low-key, conflict-free fields, journalism, the national budget, particularly in regard to health care, and now opera. So I'm a great believer, by the way, in take your parents to work, because when he was working at the White House, the whole family could picnic on this South Lawn for the 4th of July, and now we get very good opera seats. So both children have just started to collaborate with me on the column. There was a job requirement, which was you had to be very well brought up. So one of the chief themes of Miss Manners' Mind's Your Business, which Nick and I wrote together, is the need to separate private life from your professional life. So, oops. But we're not talking about the mom and pop store here, or in our case, Martin and Son together since 1966. Oddly enough, we don't have any trouble seeing the difference between our professional and our personal lives. We celebrate birthdays and we meet deadlines, but we know the difference between them. And we don't sacrifice one or the other, and we don't let one or the other intrude on the other. However, I know from the mail that other people seem to have a lot of difficulty handling this. I've had countless letters from people who are plagued with the need to celebrate the constantly occurring birthdays and showers of colleagues they may barely know or may not like. And they're desperate for an excuse to get out of these, in spite of the free cookies that come with them. But they never seem to think of pleading, well, I've got work to do. Which is very odd, because that's the first thing that people say when they want to get out of family events. And at work, people are agonizing over what secret Santa presents to get their colleagues, but with their relatives and their friends, they just pay them every time they go pass go, and they pass go a lot. Birthdays, graduation, engagements, weddings, other births, and so on, right up to funerals, where I get at least let us say, how much is your social life costing you there? Well, what is going on here is what we asked ourselves.
So on the business side, and let me adjust this, we're not quite the same height. On the business side, what we discovered is going on is that people are buying into the fiction that their work life and their family life are the same. Now, sometimes this is well meant, but sometimes it isn't. I remember running into this at my very first job. That was a few years ago. I was in 7th grade. I got a job at a small museum, and on the first or the second day, I was told that I was now a member of the museum's family. And I thought, that's strange. I have a family. What I want is a job. But there were projects and deadlines and paychecks, so I didn't worry about it too much. That was in the spring. That summer, they told me that I was in charge of the other people my age in the department. And that fall, they told me that they'd fired the other people my age in the department, fired past tense. So apparently I was only in charge of my fellow underage workers up to a point. The good news was that when my pay was being cut, actually, no, wait, the good news was that I wasn't being fired. The pay cut was just a footnote. I remember once many years ago at a different job asking for a raise and being told that this was inappropriate. What we do is not about the money, my boss said. Well, part of it is, or I would be out sailing. I actually went away from that encounter feeling bad, as if I had misbehaved. What happened at that first museum job was not, thank goodness, repeated at any of my later jobs. But that's not to say that they didn't talk about family, because they all did. I've been in and out of more families than most movie stars. In my case, there was no intent on the part of management to deceive anyone. They felt responsible for their employees, and they wanted them to feel appreciated. But they still did not mean to be taken literally. For starters, your family is supposed to look after you when you are, as we say, slipping off the platter. Businesses are supposed to maintain a productive workforce. Check the unemployment lines. The boss who says you are a member of the family has probably just fired his grandmother. She wasn't producing as well as she used to. Now, the unscrupulous boss has an incentive to convince workers that they are part of the family. It makes it embarrassing to ask for a raise in your allowance. But why do employees embrace this charade so wholeheartedly? And they do.
What's happened is that people have switched their manners. Social manners are practiced in the workplace, and business manners are practiced toward friends and family. Now, I've long been dealing with bad manners, good manners, disgusting manners, don't ask. But this is a new one, misplaced manners. When you're hiring an employee nowadays, you want to know about his or her hopes and dreams and problems and weaknesses. And you might do a leisurely session over a nice lunch. But when you're looking for a romantic partner, you take out a classified advertisement. You hold brief interviews over at most a cup of coffee. And you're very interested in knowing that person's income level. I trace this confusion to some of American society's sweetest, most cherished, and most disastrous ideas that have appeared over the years. Number one is ladylike behavior. Now, goodness knows I'm not against that, or gentlemanly behavior either. I'm old enough to remember when the law was considered a gentleman's profession. But the definition of ladylike behavior is very different from that of gentlemanly behavior. A man might be an officer and a gentleman, or a gentleman and a scholar, and the idea is that he has more than one set of manners, and he does not behave on the battlefield exactly the way he would behave in the drawing room, or in the library, for that matter. But a lady was either a lady or not a lady, and we all know what that meant. This was first apparent to me when women began to move up in the workday world. This is often described as when women entered the workforce, which is ridiculous. Poor women have worked since the beginning of time, and rich men often have not. But as women were becoming higher up, they, and I say they, but I'm talking about we, were using the only manners that we knew, which were social manners. And that included bans on bragging, on discussing money, and on stirring up controversy. Now, those manners also applied to men when they were out socially, even though you may not have seen them in a while, but they're still on the books. But on the job, it translated into not claiming credit for your work, not asking for raises, and not speaking up. I remember once I was angry about something else, and I said at the Washington Post, and I said, I haven't had a raise in 20 years. And Ben Bradley said, you haven't asked for one. Well, of course not. I'm a lady. Yeah. Habits are very hard to shake, and it took a long time to realize that this was not a good career strategy. But then something really, really strange happened. After a period in which women tried to adapt by imitating ungentlemanly men, the workplace started actually demanding social behavior. So that is mistake number one. Number two is the current guidance that parents, and I'm talking about well-meaning parents, give their children, which is just be yourself. Well, some help that is, right? Who else were you planning to be? And judging from the common defense that people make when they're rude, which is, well, I have to be myself, I have to be true to myself, it's not a very pretty self. But the idea doesn't seem to get around that you can have multiple selves. The person who behaves the same at a job interview as parting with his or her pals is not going to get the job. And there are a lot of those around. I get a lot of letters from job interviewers that say, well, they came in and they put their feet on the desk and they call me by my first name and they say, well, here's where I picture myself 10 years from now in your position. That's really very winning. But even the employee who behaves like as he does with his pals at an office party is going to be in trouble. Office parties are one of the big traps I dread after Christmas parties. Every year I get all these letters from people who thought it was a party. And they're in big trouble. People who have been brought up with this instruction to be true to themselves have a very hard time with the idea that yourself is different in different contexts. I mean, come on, you're not even the same person before and after you've had your morning coffee. Still another bad idea is the notion that all antagonisms are a result of miscommunication. And if only people knew one another better, they would love one another. I don't know about that. I mean, whom do you know more intimately than the person you're divorcing? The distance offered by a professional demeanor enables people to work together in a civil and cooperative fashion without mandating the rapport and the affection needed for friendship. And the notion that coworkers should also be friends has become inescapable.
That, in fact, it has become the idea that that's the way to build a productive team, is to foster personal bonds. Really? Your friends are the people you play with. Is that really what the boss wants? Wouldn't it be better if people say, got some work done? And why would the employee agree to the concept that the boss gets to pick who your friends are? Or, for that matter, gets to send them away so you can't play with them anymore? And even worse, what if you want to end a friendship yourself? Not so easy if the person is sitting at the desk next to you. The consequences, as you can imagine, are even worse with office romance. And it's almost irrespective of whether that office romance ends happily or unhappily. If it ends unhappily, you still have to interact with the person on a daily basis. If it doesn't end at all, your coworkers start thinking that not everyone in the office is getting the same benefits. Well, let's hope they're not getting the same benefits, but I was referring to job benefits. We are not against office friendships or office romances. In the book, we credit Homer with drawing attention to one particularly strong form of attachment at work. And no, we're talking about the war buddy in this case. Frankly, even if we were against office friendships, it wouldn't stop nature from running its course. The military tries, and we know how successful they've been. People who are brought together by common interests with a common purpose, facing the same obstacles and fighting the same fights, well, it would be odd if friendships did not form. But so do rivalries and hatreds. The point to having a business persona is to avoid the consequences of bringing your personal life to work. We get letters from people who feel betrayed because their friend fired them, or who feel pressured to invite the whole office to their weddings, or to share their lunch, or to bring coworkers gifts when they return from vacation. And that's before we get to the pressure to support the fiction of office as family by attending constant office parties, or working unpaid overtime, or for mandatory after-hours socializing. The office is going out for a drink. It's great for team building. Come along. This is seldom a casual invitation, even if they don't explicitly say that you'll be letting the team down if you don't come along, and because you want to go home at the end of the day. What seems to be forgotten is that you have a real family. You can find them by looking up from your cell phone at dinner. But what we concluded is that we spend enough time in the office. There need to be limits, or people will fail both at having a personal and a professional life.
So here we are, in apparent violation of etiquette's directive to mind your own business. But actually, if the current system were working, we wouldn't dream of interfering. But consider the unintended consequences of the reversal of social and business manners. First of all, there is a pervasive phoniness, and we Americans are supposed to be particularly despise phoniness and phony behavior. But here we are, we pretend that our coworkers are our friends, that since we don't use formal titles in addressing people, that everybody is on the same level, there's no office hierarchy, and that it's not really a workplace because we wear leisure clothes and we play video games. I won't even get into the greatest phoniness of all, which is the pretense that neither we nor the people that we want to flatter ever age. This is carried to the extreme of believing that if you forego the courtesies that should be due to age and the dignity, not to mention the senior discounts, you will achieve eternal youth. But that's another book. Workplace phoniness is a tragedy both for those who believe it and for those who do not. And most people do both at different times. We all presumably believe in equality. And in the modern workplace, we do seem to be equal. Everyone's on a first-name basis, informally dressed. There's lots of informal chatter, no closed doors, food spread around everywhere, after-hours partying, during-hours partying. And then, surprise, these pals turn out to behave like rivals or bosses. And at the same time, work identity has obliterated social identity. So the old opener, how do you do, is long since been replaced by what do you do? And apparently nobody feels confident of doing enough to be impressive. And therefore we get all that self-advertising on social media. Social media, which killed the meaning of the word friend, and is now killing the meaning of the word social. Your social life consists mostly of people you haven't met, and it's where you troll for admiration and advantages. The inevitable tragedy of pseudo-friendship occurs when the job is over. If you're fired, your friends will not look you in the eye. And they will say, let's have lunch, but they're never going to be quite free for lunch. And if you do get to talk to them, you'll listen to them complain about all the extra work they have to do now that you're gone, which is great comfort. We are far from minimizing the competing claims of professional and personal life. Nick's job at the opera requires both day and night work, and he has a working wife and a 2-year-old. And I had a similar working schedule when he and his sister were growing up. Nobody has sufficient time for work or for family. This is because we are still, like the agricultural year in the schools, the workday world is still operating on the 19th century plan, under which one person in a couple had all the responsibility for doing business, and the other person only had to run the private realm, which was child rearing, social life, philanthropy, civic participation, and writing all the thank you letters. Systematic changes are needed, and they are mighty slow in coming. So what we are offering in the meantime is a guide to the principles and the day-by-day particulars of problems that people have written into us about, of coping with this situation unhampered by phony assumptions and unburdened by false obligations that are just making things worse. So that way you get to remember that if you remember that to listen to the hopes and dreams of your family and friends, and that you are not embarrassing yourself by expecting money for work. Thank you.